I had the opportunity to be part of a call from our leadership on our side of the aisle a little less than 2 weeks ago. And in that conversation, we talked about the most important issues facing the Congress in the month we'll be in September prior to the recess. And top on the agenda was dealing with the emergency situation on the federal response in the Baton Rouge flood disaster area. And that issue was brought to the conference and leadership attention by Congressman Graves. That conversation took place on a Thursday. On Friday, we made plans for me to visit the affected area, and with the cooperation and direction of Chairman Chaffetz, went down and personally spent most of Sunday and all of Monday touring the area, visiting the affected sites, both on the ground and from the air, meeting with local officials to assess where we were. Chairman Chaffetz has also agreed, because of the emergency nature of the situation we find ourselves in, to have this subcommittee hearing at this point, and I think that's very important that we conduct immediate and thorough oversight, particularly in a disaster of this magnitude. As we all know, on August 11th, 2016, we had a natural disaster in the Baton Rouge area of Louisiana that brought torrential rains, probably a 1 in 1,000-year storm. That storm and the water, which inundated tens of thousands. In fact, we estimate, well, right now we have over 143,000 claims. That storm did incredible damage in a very unique manner. The damage estimates are incalculable right now, but I can tell you that more than 250,000 people have been displaced from their home, and many people are still in shelters. I think yesterday I got the report of over 800 still in shelters. When I was there a week ago, there were 2,000. This is a unique natural disaster in its implications, again, of its size and scope. It also is unique in that most of the country is not paying attention to, again, one of the most impactful natural disasters we've had in our country, probably since Hurricane Katrina. We've got some photos, too, that we brought back. The devastation is sprawling and endless. It's community after community, subdivision after subdivision. You can see people's, the contents of their homes in the streets. The Louisiana folks are the finest folks I have ever met in the face of a disaster, who have helped neighbors and friends and family, got their homes, but both the contents and the parts of the structure that, again, were damaged are all in the streets. And this goes on mile after mile, neighborhood after neighborhood, town after town. About 80% of the homeowners did not have flood insurance because their homes were not located in a federally identified area that alerted them or considered that those areas would flood according to the maps produced by the federal government. After meeting with dozens of state officials, business leaders, and federal officials, my investigation and our work down there on that visit discovered some of the response by FEMA was not acceptable, and we unfortunately learned from this disaster and that visit some huge deficits in our federal response. We went through Hurricane Katrina and some other disasters. We had a $2.7 billion fiasco with trailers, some of which were found to have formaldehyde. But we spent all that money, time, and FEMA was to be able to address a natural disaster, one of this nature, with some housing. When I arrived more than 2 weeks afterwards, there was one unit, put that photo back up, there was one modular unit that had been constructed. Go back one more. If you look behind the debris, that was the single FEMA modular unit. 143,000 homes uninhabitable, and 2.1 weeks later, that was the only unit. There were 73 units that were not deployed in a field that I visited, and I was told another 40 in another field, even though 250 sites had been approved for receiving those units. We also found that many problems with those units because first the cost was about $60,000, and then it was about $20,000 to transport and erect those structures. So we had one up, not an acceptable response. FEMA should have learned from the mistakes of Katrina. Unfortunately, they were not ready for this disaster. They did not have housing. As of Friday, I was told there were 17 of those units now up. Again, 143,000 homes uninhabitable, more than 250,000 people displaced, and we had 3 weeks later, possibly 17 units. Now, I'm told it may be a lower number, but that is not an acceptable federal response. A constant theme, unfortunately, has been FEMA's non-responsible and responsiveness, and sometimes providing contradictory information. When we visited Denham Springs and met with the mayor, and we'll hear from him, Denham Springs, probably 80% of the structures were affected in that town. Probably 50% of their business area was destroyed, probably will never come back. They did not have a disaster recovery center until 19 days after the flood. I met with the mayor, and the mayor actually, his contact, point of contact was on a slip of paper he showed me. He finally got a contact almost 3 weeks after the disaster in one of the most hard-hit cities in Louisiana. That's not an acceptable response from FEMA. And then emergency water, we heard repeated stories of FEMA water, which is supposed to be located to go in, took days, 4 to 5 days to actually get there. Only through the good graces and assistance of neighbors and friends did they have fresh water at some of these sites. We need to determine how many leftover or wasted funds from Hurricane Sandy that we could reuse and put towards Baton Rouge. We need to carefully examine all of the things that went wrong with FEMA and correct them for the future. No community or state should endure what has occurred in a federal response to the natural disaster in the Baton Rouge area. I encourage all those dealing with FEMA to, when I was there, to make certain that they had taken names, got commitment in writing for everything they're going to do, because they've already seen hundreds of people come in from all around the country making commitments, and these people will soon be gone. And already we've had the confusion of FEMA giving certain commitments to individuals and other folks at different levels of FEMA coming in and giving a counter opinion. So we're not in a very good situation. We've got to do better, and I know both sides of the aisle are committed to help in this situation. Let me yield.